close to the River Thames as it comes through towards Windsor itself. The tradition of throwing flowers into the road began, I think, with the funeral of Princess Diana, when, you may remember, as you can see on the royal hearse now, flowers on the bonnet. There were flowers on the windscreen that had to be wiped away with windscreen wipers. So as we wait for the hearse to come to the castle grounds itself, and then the start of the full procession, let's just get back for a moment to Kirsty.
It was not only an honour and a treat, but a slightly nerve-wracking set of circumstances. How did you find it?
Yes, and indeed, as a bishop, you're not there as a house guest, you're there as a member of the Queen's household at that time. You're there to preach at Sandringham on the Sunday. And again, a very nerve-wracking experience, but as we've heard so often in recent days, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth was amazing at making you feel very at home. And I particularly remember her sitting at her card table, playing Patience and sitting next to her. And it really put one at your ease, because you weren't looking eye to eye like this. She was looking down, playing cards and talking, and it was a wonderful thing that she did to make you feel at home.
Something that we've heard very often people saying over the last 10, 11 days is that they felt that the Queen, for 70 years, or however many years they had been alive, was this constant, this reassuring presence that was constantly there, that represented continuity. So she did that for the hundreds of thousands of people who queued to see her lying in state. She did it for the millions who watched the lying in state online. I was thinking about where she got her reassurance from and where she got her continuity from, and I'm imagining the answer to that might be her faith, because we are told time and time again that that was absolutely central to who she was.
Absolutely. She was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ. And it's interesting you saying, Kirsty, about that constant presence, because even in death, she has been constant till now. People watching the coffin at this very moment, people, thousands of people queuing to be even in her presence in death. And of course now, as we come to the committal, we are acknowledging that that presence will be no more, that we are letting go, but we are letting go of her into eternal life with God. And she believed that, and as a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe that. And I think there's that thing that's been acknowledged again and again about her referring to Christ as the one who came to earth not to be served, but to serve. And her service has been noted again and again. And that ability she had to make every person feel very special in that moment. And I would say that's because she knew that her sovereignty was bestowed upon her by God, and yet she was a human being.
Studying much of what she said, and particularly in her Christmas messages, she seemed, as she grew older, to be, I think, bolder about stating her faith and talking about it more openly. Is that something you discerned? Did you feel that? Even though it was always with her, one gets the feeling that she sort of thought, well, I'm not necessarily going to listen to the advisors who might say that's a turn-off, and it is a turn-off for plenty of people. I'm going to simply tell it like it is.
Yes, I think that's true, that she was confident in sharing her faith. Perhaps that did get stronger as she got older. But that sense that she was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ, and yet wanted to be there for all people, and people of all faith and no faith. And that sense that she knew that every human being, she believed, as I believe, is created in the image of God and was unique and precious.
We're going to witness again, as we have done day in, day out over the past 11 days, the ritualizing of grief, that somehow that is the thing that the Church has seemed to give us through this period, where we are wondering about what we feel, wondering how we can mark the importance of this momentous passing, the Church has in a way come into its own in that respect. And it has said to us, well, you might be a believer, you might not be a believer, but this is the way we can make sense of a very difficult situation.
Yes, and I would say that in death the Queen has served us, because her death has enabled us to really allow our own stories to resonate with this national story of grief and mourning. Over these last few days, her death has held that space. And I would say, if we see all the flowers, the tributes, that's also central to Christian faith, that actually the body of Christ we talk about. And in her life and in her death, people are being drawn together. And my hope and prayer is that our remembering won't be mere nostalgia,
yes,
but that it will change us. That as we gather and as we watch this committal service, that each person will ask, what does this mean to me? What will my life be because of this?
That's very interesting. Is that then what you think, because my final question to you really was going to be, I was going to ask you what you think the legacy of this monarch will be. Is that it?
I hope that her faith will be remembered, that it will live on. I hope that it will make people curious. I hope people will be curious about faith. And I hope that that legacy will be that in our differences, we come together. So often in our world, we live in a world where difference divides people. And at the heart of the Christian message is we might have differences, but we move towards one another in our differences.
Thank you very much, the Right Reverend Rachel Treweek. Very interesting to talk to you and hear your reflections. Thank you very much. Well, now, as the State Hearse approaches Windsor for the final time, here is David Dimbleby.
Thank you, Kirsty. This empty road now, as the hearse approaches the middle of the long walk that leads up to Windsor Castle. As everywhere the hearse passes, a salute as it goes past. And on the long walk itself, at the bottom end, the guard of honour that will escort it up to the castle is assembling. That little crossing you can see at the bottom of the long walk there with the flowers on either side, that's the Cambridge Gate. We're looking at it from Windsor Castle, and the whole procession will come from the far distance there, right past these throngs of people on either side of this great park. The equerries in uniform there, many of them, and they're chosen to stand either side of the coffin. Equerries who served the Queen either at Balmoral or Windsor or at Buckingham Palace or at Sandringham indeed, and they stand closest to the coffin, and the bearer party on the either side of them, the bearskins drawn from the Queen's company of the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards. Grenadier Guards who were the closest regiment to the Sovereign, the Queen's company particularly close to her. The Grenadier Guards who loyalty to the British Sovereign has never been questioned. So they don't, in practice, ever drink a toast to the monarch, because their loyalty is undoubted. This splendid sight now starting to gather, and it will be very similar but slightly more modest, perhaps is a way of putting it. Slightly more intense is another way of thinking of it. The Household Cavalry, a division of the Sovereign's escort. Pipes and drums band of the Grenadier Guard, dismounted band of the Household Cavalry. First Division of the Sovereign's escort mounted, and before them the dismounted detachment of the Household Cavalry, the Life Guards. And the Queen's company colour, borne by an officer of the Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, carried in front of the hearse. It's such a strange sight after seeing those processions in London, to see this procession down a country road in all its solemnity, because this is the country, in effect. This is the Queen's coffin coming back to the place that she called home. No crowds here, just walking along this road, this long procession, and then it will turn up and start coming up to the grandeur of the long walk. The minute gun firing every minute, and 5 seconds later, the Sebastopol bell. The heralds have come from the centre of London to take their place in this procession. Absent from this procession at this stage is the royal family. Only when this procession has reached the long walk and has turned and has come up to Windsor Castle will the King and the Queen Consort and the other members of the royal family join in as they were in London. Meanwhile, at the west door of St. George's Chapel, the stepliners, a dismounted steplining party found by the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment, is taking up its place, and the clergy of the chapel on the left there. And it's up these steps that the coffin will come when the procession finally reaches this horseshoe cloister at the bottom end of the chapel. The clergy, including, you may have noticed, the Archbishop of Canterbury, come from Westminster Abbey. And the other clergy on the left there of the Chapel Royal, the Dean of the Chapel Royal in Scotland, the Rector of Sandringham will be here, the Minister of Crathy Church, or Crathy Kirk, perhaps I should call it, Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie will be here, the chaplain from the Queen's Chapel of the Savoy as well, and the Dean of the Chapels Royal, Sarah Mullally, Bishop of London. This is the Horseshoe Cloister, this red building with black beams, reconstructed by the Victorians, but making a great cloister with its guard of honor here, 3 officers and 110 rank and file from the battalion, 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, who hold this ground in the front of the chapel. Sir Tony Blair, with his Garter insignia, arriving from Westminster, along with other people who've come by coach from Westminster to be here. So when I said that here at St George's it was going to be largely household and people who were friends perhaps of the Queen and godchildren and the wider family, that's all true. But there's also, because it is still a state funeral, there are also going to be representatives who were at Westminster Abbey and who've come down here, particularly the politicians. The Prime Minister will be here. And some of the foreign royals, particularly, again, the royal families. There's always been a very close link between royal family in Britain and other royal families. For instance, the Queen of Denmark, who now is the last serving woman monarch in Europe with the death of the Queen, she will be here. The procession has now entered the Long Walk for a journey of a mile or more from here up to Windsor Castle. Led by a dismounted detachment of the Household Cavalry and these equerries and the escort party of the Grenadier Guards still escorting the state hearse. I can't tell you what extraordinary scenes there have been in Windsor over the last 3 days. These crowds just crammed in here to the Long Walk is just part of what has been a constant toing and froing of people coming, bringing flowers, bringing their children. As we've heard so often when people were explaining why they were visiting the going to the lying in state at Westminster Hall, they just wanted their children to remember that they'd been there. Like people who say, I remember, or my grandfather remembers Queen Victoria's funeral, just that these moments when people want to be there, so they have a memory of it. The massed pipes and drums of Scottish and Irish regiments take up the music with the skirl of the pipes and the shimmering drums. officers of the royal household, the director of the royal collection, the master of the household, just in front of the state hearse there. The procession is now coming up a steep hill towards the castle itself, maybe why they were just slowing down a little there. See the route liners come to the salute as the front of the procession, the dismounted detachment of the household cavalry approaches them. And that's where they're headed, to that doorway, the George IV gate, between the two towers at the top of the hill. And that's where, in the quadrangle, the king and members of the royal family will join this procession, and it will turn round down to the left, to the lower ward. The heralds have marched all this way. The distinctive eagle's feathers, the Royal Company of Archers for Scotland, the velvet caps of the watermen, those blue velvet jockey caps, the watermen who used to always accompany the sovereign, and the Queen's Gurkha orderly officers just in front, the very bottom of your picture, the Gurkhas who, ever since Edward VII's coronation in 1901, were given a special place at court.